Now, more on the COVID-19 outbreak at Joyceville Institution in Kingston, Ontario. At least 80 inmates have tested positive. There are now also 8 cases at 2 other prisons linked to Joyceville. All in-person visits at Ontario correctional centres are now temporarily suspended. For more on what's happening in Joyceville, we've reached out to Justin Pichet. He's an associate professor at the Department of Criminology at the University of Ottawa. Professor, I want to thank you for joining us. We do have, in response to a CBC email that we sent out yesterday, where they gave us the latest numbers here, and I'll just run them. In fact, 83 inmates at Joyceville, 6 at Collins Bay, 3 at Warkworth, 1 at Beaver Creek Institution, and they run us through the various aspects of that. Health and safety of our employees, offenders, and the public remains our top priority throughout the public health pandemic, and we're monitoring the situation closely and diligently. When you look at those numbers, what do you think of the, particularly in Joyceville, but potential conditions in the correctional institutions?
Well, the folks inside that I've been in touch with are telling me that the COs or the correctional officers told them that COVID came in through newly admitted prisoners who were not tested coming in or going out through a quarantine range that they're on for 14 days. The COs asked Joyceville's management to be testing guys before they left the quarantine range, where they were there for 14 days, coming before being moved elsewhere in the institution or transferred to other sites of human caging. And what I'm hearing is that management refused that request from staff, and that 15 out of 16 ranges at Joyceville Institution have at least 1 COVID case on them. So the total's actually on their websites now 85 cases at Joyceville, as well as 6 related cases at Collins Bay and Kingston, another 3 cases at Warkworth in Trent Hills, Ontario, and another case at Beaver Creek in Gravenhurst, all of which originated from folks that were on that quarantine range, and it spread out. So, I'm also hearing things from folks at Beaver Creek saying that, and I'm quoting this phone conversation I had, that the prisoner that came from Joyceville at Beaver Creek was immediately placed into Unit 9 with other men without a test or quarantine. Once he showed symptoms, they moved him to a behavioral unit. Once they had a positive test result, they moved him to quarantine. When someone comes into an institution, they're supposed to be in quarantine first. So procedures, if this ends up being true, are not being followed. And this is hardly an isolated incident either. This just happened at the provincial level in Saskatchewan, where nearly 20 people forcibly confined at the Saskatoon Correctional Centre were transferred over to the Regina Correctional Centre, and there was COVID there, and now that's spread to Regina. So, this is it's outrageous, and it's happening in different parts across the country, and it obviously impacts our communities as well. Staff go in and out of these institutions day in and day out. They go back to their families. They go back into their communities, and stores that we all shop in. We should be very, very concerned about what's happening in these congregate settings, prisons included.
Okay, so I have to ask you, Professor Pichet, how are you able to access those numbers? How can you be sure of the accuracy of the numbers that you're talking about there in these various institutions?
Well, the numbers are coming from media reports or from governments themselves. So, I mean, that's not a concern as far as accuracy. And as far as the stories that I'm hearing, it's coming from various different people. Before I'd go out and put statements on people's behalf, have to try and make sure that it's as accurate as possible. But of course, CSC has not been providing prisoners with information as far as the wardens and institutional management. So the prisoners have been speaking out because they want access to information, which as of yesterday, when I spoke to folks at Joyceville, hadn't happened yet. And they're on lockdown for days without basic information, and rumors start circulating, and that's not good for anyone inside the institution. So CSC needs to get to work and set up those meetings so that at least folks are going with accurate information.
Okay, I've got time for one more question, Justin, and I do want to ask this, that I think it's fair to say that overcrowding, lack of space, an issue in any correctional institution at the best of times. What are the challenges, the real challenges of housing people safely in a pandemic like this?
Well, they're not safe during non-pandemic times, and they won't be during pandemic times. Communicable diseases have spread through prisons before this current pandemic. So they're congregate settings. They need to be safely depopulated to the degree that's possible, in order to reduce the number of folks that can be impacted in situations like this. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and federal cabinet need to do what's necessary to contain COVID, not people. They have the royal prerogative of mercy. They can give more resources to the Parole Board of Canada to process more parole hearings than they have previously. They put in some money during the first wave, but they need to do more. We need use of temporary absences. I spoke to Vice Chief Kim Bowden of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples this morning. He's calling for safe depopulation of federal penitentiaries. We have to consider here in Canada, Indigenous people and Black people are mass incarcerated. They're treated differentially at every stage of the penal system, from arrest to decisions about their parole. And so if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is serious about reconciliation and anti-Black racism and doing something about it, he needs to start doing some work here on the federal penitentiary system and not ignoring what's going on, because it has reverberations, not just for prisoners, not just for prison staff, but all of us. And subjecting people to lockdowns and segregation is not a recipe for public safety when most people will eventually return into our communities, having endured the violence of imprisonment and the violence of COVID.
Justin Piché, I want to thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. Keep safe.
You too. Happy holidays. Justin Piché, professor at the University of Ottawa and a member of the Criminalization and Punishment Education Project, and he joined us from Ottawa.